There's a moment many people know but rarely admit out loud. You meet someone, your body rushes with heat, your mind spins with fantasy, and you're convinced what you want is physical. But when the rush fades, instead of fulfillment, you feel strangely hollow, a kind of emptiness that gnaws at you. It's not pleasure, it's not love, it's not even lust anymore. It's a void. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who devoted his life to studying the depths of the human psyche, once captured this experience in a deceptively simple idea. You think it's lust, but it's actually emptiness. At first glance, it sounds like a warning against desire. But Jung wasn't condemning sexuality. He wasn't moralizing in the way religion often does. He was pointing to something more uncomfortable, that much of what we call lust is actually a misfired attempt to cure loneliness, alienation, or lack of meaning. In other words, when the soul hungers, the body often takes the blame. We chase flesh when what we really crave is connection. We grasp at intensity when what we really need is wholeness. This video will dig into that idea in detail. We'll look at Jung's understanding of libido and how it differs from Freud's, examine the difference between lust and emptiness, explore the role of projection, shadow, and the unconscious in shaping desire, and then move into the larger cultural implications, from hookup culture to consumerism to the epidemic of loneliness. We'll also consider the opposite side, when lust is just lust. And finally, we'll see how Jung's concept of individuation offers a way out of the cycle, turning emptiness into an opportunity for growth rather than an endless chase for substitutes. 1. Jung's view of libido and desire. To understand Jung's statement, we need to start with his concept of libido. Unlike Freud, who saw libido primarily as sexual energy, Jung expanded the idea to mean psychic energy in general. For him, libido was not just about sex, it was about life force, the energy that fuels creativity, ambition, relationships, spirituality, and yes, sexual desire. Lust, then, is only one manifestation of this broader current. When libido is blocked or misdirected, Jung believed it often expresses itself in distorted forms. For example, a person who feels spiritually starved might pursue extreme sensual pleasures, confusing intensity for fulfillment. This is where lust and emptiness blur. The libido seeks expression, but instead of being directed toward meaningful creation or self-integration, it spills into compulsive behaviors that never truly satisfy. The body becomes the canvas where the unconscious paints its hunger. This is what makes Jung's interpretation so piercing. He doesn't treat lust as a simple, natural urge that demands release, nor does he demonize it as sinful. Instead, he asks, what is this energy really pointing to? Often, what looks like lust on the surface is actually the psyche trying to communicate a deeper hunger. The craving isn't for another body, it's for connection, meaning, or reconciliation with the lost parts of ourselves. 2. Lust versus emptiness, definitions and distinctions. Lust is often defined as intense sexual desire, but in practice, it's more than just a physical urge. Lust carries a psychological intensity, a burning fixation, a kind of tunnel vision. It makes someone else appear as the answer to a hunger you can't quite name. Yet once satisfied, lust often collapses into fatigue or disinterest. That temporary relief reveals it was never truly about sex in the first place. Emptiness, by contrast, is harder to define but easier to recognize. It's that low hum of dissatisfaction, the nagging feeling that something is missing, even when life looks full on the outside. Emptiness is the absence of meaning, the ache of alienation from others or from oneself. When emptiness is painful, the psyche scrambles for ways to numb or disguise it. Lust is one of the most powerful disguises because it feels urgent, exciting, and embodied, a distraction from the void. The distinction matters because lust is fleeting while emptiness persists. If what we're really feeling is emptiness, then satisfying lust won't solve it. Instead, the cycle repeats: desire, gratification, disappointment, return to desire. Jung's insight pushes us to see beneath the surface, to ask whether the craving in front of us is truly for intimacy, or whether it's a mask for loneliness, disconnection, or a deeper spiritual hunger. 3. Projection. Why we think others hold what we lack. One of Jung's most important concepts is projection, the unconscious tendency to see in others what we deny or lack in ourselves. In relationships, projection often shows up as infatuation. We meet someone and instantly feel drawn to them, convinced they hold the missing piece to our puzzle. But in truth, what we're seeing is our own unrecognized qualities mirrored back at us. When lust is really emptiness, projection plays a central role. The other person becomes a screen onto which we project our hunger for wholeness. We don't just desire their body, we unconsciously believe they can fill the void inside us. This explains why lust sometimes feels so overwhelming. It's not just about sex, it's about the fantasy of completion. The problem, of course, is that no person can actually deliver on that unconscious promise. Jung described this in terms of the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine figures within the psyche. When these inner figures remain unintegrated, we project them onto others, mistaking the longing for inner balance as sexual or romantic attraction. Lust, in this sense, becomes the psyche's misguided attempt to achieve wholeness through another person. The tragedy is that it often leaves us more empty, because we're chasing external substitutes for an internal task. 4. Shadow, compulsion, and the unconscious. Jung often warned that whatever we repress does not disappear. It descends into the unconscious and gains power. This is what he called the shadow, the hidden side of ourselves that contains everything we deny, avoid, or cannot accept. When we don't face the shadow directly, it leaks into our behavior through compulsions, addictions, or projections. Lust, when it is really emptiness, is often one of these shadow eruptions. Compulsive lust is different from natural desire. Natural desire has rhythm, it rises and falls, and it can be integrated into intimacy, creativity, or play. Compulsion, however, feels urgent and consuming. It demands release but offers no real satisfaction. Jung would say this is the shadow speaking, unacknowledged loneliness. Grief, or lack of meaning, wearing the mask of sexual hunger. The more we ignore the true emptiness underneath, the more the compulsion grows, because the shadow feeds on neglect. This is why lust can become addictive. People caught in cycles of meaningless hookups, pornography binges, or obsessive fantasies often describe a kind of trance state. It's not about pleasure anymore. It's about escape. The psyche is trying to avoid facing its own void, so it diverts the libido into repetitive behaviors. Jung's framework helps us see that the problem isn't simply moral weakness or lack of willpower. It's the psyche's desperate attempt to manage pain it doesn't know how to face. Lust becomes a bandage over a wound that needs actual healing. 5. Emptiness as existential hunger. To understand why emptiness so often masquerades as lust, we have to look at the nature of emptiness itself. Emptiness is not just boredom or loneliness. It is an existential hunger, the sense that something vital is missing from our lives. It's the quiet but persistent awareness that we are disconnected from meaning, from others, or from ourselves. And because that hunger feels unbearable, we instinctively look for quick ways to fill it. In modern life, emptiness is everywhere. We live in a time where technology promises constant connection, yet rates of loneliness and depression are higher than ever. Consumer culture encourages us to fill the void with purchases, while digital platforms encourage us to fill it with attention. Sex in this context becomes another commodity, another dopamine hit to stave off the ache. Jung's insight feels especially relevant today. Much of what we mistake for lust is actually a symptom of our struggle to live with emptiness. What's dangerous about this confusion is that lust feels like an answer, but it only deepens the void. People often describe the aftermath of casual encounters, compulsive sex, or porn binges as a kind of post-desire emptiness, sharper than before. It's not just that the hunger remains, it's that we realize the hunger can't be satisfied that way. Jung might say the soul is trying to communicate a need for wholeness, but we silence it with substitutes. The result is a culture where lust dominates, but emptiness quietly rules underneath. 6. Case studies and examples. The dynamic Jung described shows up not just in psychology, but in literature, culture, and everyday life. Take, for example, the character of Anna in Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. Her pursuit of romantic passion is so intense it consumes her, but beneath her longing for love is a deeper despair, a sense of meaninglessness in her role and life. What looks like lust and passion on the surface is in fact an attempt to fill an inner emptiness that no lover can satisfy. Her tragedy illustrates Jung's point perfectly. Chasing desire without addressing the void only amplifies suffering. In modern culture, hookup culture and the explosion of dating apps provide another clear case. Many people enter these encounters convinced they are simply pursuing sexual freedom, but research often shows that the aftermath is not liberation, but heightened loneliness and dissatisfaction. The body is satisfied, but the heart feels emptier. Jung's lens helps us see why. What we are calling lust is often a disguised plea for intimacy, belonging, or meaning. The app swipes are less about sex than they are about distracting ourselves from the terrifying silence of emptiness. Clinical psychology offers similar observations. Therapists working with clients struggling with sex addiction often note that the problem isn't a high sex drive but unresolved trauma, loneliness, or depression. Patients use lust the way others use alcohol or drugs, as a numbing agent. The fact that sexual desire is the chosen escape is almost incidental. Jung would interpret this as the psyche misdirecting libido, pouring vital energy into compulsive repetition instead of toward healing or integration. Again, lust here is not really lust, it's emptiness, wearing a seductive mask. 7. Jung versus Freud on lust. Jung's insight becomes sharper when we contrast it with Freud's view of desire. Freud argued that human behavior is largely driven by the sexual instinct. For him, libido was fundamentally sexual energy, and much of civilization was built on repressing, redirecting, or sublimating it. When Freud looked at lust, he saw it as the core engine of human motivation, disguised in countless ways. Jung, while influenced by Freud, thought this view was too narrow. Jung broadened the definition of libido into general psychic energy. He saw sexual desire as one expression of this deeper current, but not its essence. For Jung, lust was not always about sex. It could be about power, creativity, spirituality, or the drive toward meaning. When people mistake emptiness for lust, it's because libido has become misdirected. Rather than pointing us toward growth or inner integration, it gets stuck in compulsive physical desire. In this way, Jung reframed lust not as the essence of life, but as a symptom of something deeper. This distinction matters. Freud might have interpreted compulsive lust as repressed sexuality pushing for expression. Jung would say it's not repressed sexuality at all. It's repressed meaning, repressed wholeness, repressed connection. Freud located the human problem in sexual repression. Jung located it in spiritual emptiness. This is why Jung's quote resonates so strongly today. In a world saturated with sexual imagery and endless outlets for desire, the problem isn't repression, it's misinterpretation. We think the hunger is sexual, but the real hunger is existential. 8. Individuation. Transforming emptiness. For Jung, the goal of life was individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating the unconscious parts of the self. In this framework, emptiness is not a flaw to escape, but a signal pointing to the work that must be done. When we feel emptiness, it's often the psyche's way of saying, you have lost contact with yourself. There is something missing that only you can retrieve. Lust, when mistaken for emptiness, is simply an avoidance tactic. An attempt to outsource the work of individuation onto another person. The path forward then is not to suppress desire but to examine it. What is this lust pointing to? Is it really about sex, or is it about a hunger for intimacy, recognition, creativity, or meaning? By asking these questions, we begin to redirect libido toward integration rather than compulsion. Jung would encourage us to look inward, to confront the shadow, to dialogue with the anima animus, and to seek the deeper root of our hunger. Only then can emptiness be transformed into a source of growth, instead of endless craving. Individuation reframes emptiness as an opportunity. Instead of numbing it with lust, we can approach it as a doorway to transformation. The void reveals where we are incomplete, and by facing it, we integrate new aspects of ourselves. Lust is not the enemy here, it is a messenger. It tells us that something is missing. But if we stop at lust, we never hear the message. If we look deeper, emptiness can guide us toward the wholeness we secretly crave. 9. Lust, emptiness, and modern society. If Jung were alive today, he might say that we live in a culture that thrives on confusing lust with emptiness. Dating apps, pornography, advertising, and even social media constantly exploit this confusion. They promise satisfaction through desire, swipe, click, buy, consume, but what they actually feed is the cycle of emptiness. Our economy depends on it. The more hollow we feel, the more we crave stimulation. Lust becomes not just a personal misinterpretation, but a cultural industry. The dopamine economy thrives on this cycle. Platforms are designed to trigger desire, deliver a brief hit of satisfaction, and then drop us back into emptiness, ready for the next fix. Lust becomes a commodity, Not just sexual lust, but lust for likes, followers, possessions, experiences. Each promise of fulfillment is followed by the same void. Jung's words echo here with alarming relevance. You think it's lust, but it's emptiness. Our collective psyche is trapped in the loop. This cultural environment makes individuation harder, because everywhere we look, we're offered shortcuts. Why sit with emptiness when you can scroll, swipe, or click it away? Yet the more we avoid the void, the deeper it grows. Jung believed that modern people suffered most not from repression but from meaninglessness. Our society has perfected the art of distraction, so much so that we often don't realize our lust is a cover for emptiness. This makes his insight not just psychological, but profoundly cultural, a mirror held up to an age that confuses desire with fulfillment at every turn. 10. Counter-arguments. Sometimes lust is just lust. To be fair, not every experience of lust is a disguise for emptiness. Jung's insight is powerful, but it should not be overstretched. Sometimes lust really is just lust, a biological drive, a natural expression of attraction, or a moment of playful desire. To reduce every desire to emptiness risks moralizing or over-pathologizing something that is also a healthy part of life. In fact, sexuality can be a source of connection, vitality, and joy. When expressed consciously, without illusion or projection, lust can deepen intimacy rather than mask emptiness. The difference lies in awareness. If lust is pursued in a way that leaves both people feeling more alive, more present, and more whole, then it is not emptiness at all. It is life expressing itself. The problem arises when lust becomes compulsive, repetitive, and disconnected from the deeper needs of the psyche. By acknowledging this nuance, we keep Jung's insight balanced. The point is not to demonize desire, but to question it. Is this lust an authentic expression of connection and vitality? Or is it a compulsive attempt to avoid emptiness? That self-reflection is crucial. Lust is not inherently a mask for emptiness, but when it leaves us emptier than before, that's when Jung's words cut to the bone. 11. From hunger to wholeness. Practical reflections. So what do we do with this insight? Jung would not offer quick fixes, but he would encourage us to treat emptiness as a teacher. The first step is honesty, to admit that sometimes our desires are not what they seem. Instead of rushing to gratify lust, we can pause and ask what lies underneath. Am I lonely? Am I disconnected from meaning? Am I projecting unmet needs onto someone else? These questions turn lust from a reflex into a doorway. Another practice Jung valued was shadow work, deliberately exploring the parts of ourselves we deny. Often, emptiness lingers because we refuse to face grief, fear, or vulnerability. By confronting these directly, we weaken their hold. Lust no longer needs to mask them because they have been acknowledged. Journaling, therapy, dreams, and creative work all help bring the unconscious into awareness. Through this process, emptiness becomes less terrifying, more like a signal pointing us toward integration. Finally, Jung would point us toward individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole. This means learning to direct libido toward creativity, spirituality, and authentic connection, rather than endless cycles of compulsion. Individuation doesn't erase lust, but it transforms it. Desire becomes less about filling a void, and more about expressing wholeness. Lust stops being an escape from emptiness, and becomes one strand in a richer, more integrated life. Conclusion. You think it's lust, but it's actually emptiness. Carl Jung's deceptively simple statement pulls back the mask on one of the most common human experiences. Lust often feels urgent and undeniable, but beneath its surface it frequently hides something more vulnerable: emptiness. We chase bodies when we're really chasing connection. We pursue intensity when we're really yearning for meaning. And when the chase ends in hollowness, it's because the hunger was never physical in the first place. Jung's perspective doesn't condemn lust. Instead, it invites us to look deeper. It challenges us to ask whether our desires are truly about intimacy, or whether they are projections of unmet needs. It shows us how the shadow transforms emptiness into compulsion, how culture exploits this confusion, and how individuation offers a way out. Lust is not the enemy, emptiness unacknowledged is. And the only way forward is to face the void, rather than disguise it. In the end, Jung's insight is not just psychological, it's profoundly human. To live is to hunger, and sometimes that hunger confuses us. But if we can pause, reflect, and listen to what our emptiness is really asking for, lust transforms. It stops being an endless cycle of craving, and becomes a messenger guiding us toward wholeness. That is the task Jung left us, not to silence desire, but to see through it. To recognize that sometimes what we think is lust is actually the soul crying out for meaning.